I've played a lot of Super Nintendo games, and most of the time I have them loose. They just sit on the shelf horizontally or vertically, and outside of a label, that's the most that I see. But for people in the 80s and the early 90s, game boxes were the potential make and break. It was the first thing you saw, and when push came to shove, it may have directly impacted your purchasing decision or the decision of your parents. There are games with badass box art, and conversely, there are games with horrible box art. And today, I'm going to name my top 10 worst Super Nintendo box arts out there. Now, I will say I sat through a Google Drive that contained all licensed titles on the Super Nintendo. These are the ones that stood out to me. Let's begin. Do you remember Conflict? It's an NES game, one of those fancy red versus blue strategy games popped out by Vic Tokai. I've heard it's a great game, and at some point I'd like to play it. But did you know that there was a sequel? It's called Super Conflict, and it wasn't developed by Vic Tokai this time. Instead, it was developed by Manley and Associates, and it came out during a time where war was cool, because Saddam Hussein was having himself a good old-fashioned boogaloo, and while America wanted oil, publishers wanted games. War is a popular setting. People love taking down the bad guy, and much like the NES version, this game was relatively well received. If you enjoy strategy games, I think you'd like this one. But if you were to look at the box, you'd be somewhat confused. The box art for Super Conflict features what I can only assume is a C-list porn star wearing a military outfit from Spirit Halloween, taking a photo op in the middle of war. It's very silly, and I hope that the tanks behind him are friendly, because if they aren't, he's about to have a bad day. In my previous episode where we covered the worst NES box arts, Barbie was number one, because I felt it was beyond lazy to just have a photo of a Barbie doll on the front cover. High-tech expressions did not learn their lesson, and they repeated the same offense. By the way, if you haven't checked out my previous episode, I'll go ahead and link it down below and at the end of this episode. It's a good one. I had fun with it. But if we head back to the game, it's stupid. I would bill it as an educational game with extra steps, and what's funny is that this game was on DOS and Genesis as well, and they all look the same and play exactly the same. We drive Barbie's car, we roller skate, we ride a bike. The whole thing revolves around a fashion show, which if you were a young lady of the era, you probably liked this game, or at least were interested in it. If you liked Barbie, right? Just makes sense. But the big issue stems from the creative direction of high-tech expressions and their vision. Almost all of the early Barbie games are basic as basic can be, and I'm not a big fan of them. Again, the box art is just pink with a Barbie on it. Yay! If you are a fan of gaming on the Amiga or the Atari ST, you might recognize Magic Boy. It was developed by Blue Turtle, and it's a run-of-the-mill platformer where we play as Hewlett, a problem child, who trips over a trapdoor and unleashes every animal that his master is trapped down there. At least that's how it goes on the computer. For the Super Nintendo port, they did mix it up a little bit. Hewlett adds mercury to a potion instead of parsley. Because you know, those two things are very difficult to confuse. I have to make a conscious effort not to grow mercury in my hydroponic plant and put parsley in my fucking thermometers. I get it. By the way, what happens if you drink a potion with mercury? Logically, you would say, catastrophic kidney failure! But not if you ask Blue Turtle. Apparently, it turns you into an elephant. Who knew? Not me. The level of logic transferred fairly well to the box art, where we see Hewlett in what appears to be a sewer with springs all over it and small animals and an oversized chapstick that's probably supposed to be a magic wand, but what do I know? I'm just a boy. There's a lot of clash going on here. Red on yellow, not the best decision. But hey, at least they put a white boundary around it. This is a very interesting game for a few different reasons. The developers who made this game were known as GTE Interactive Media. Why does that matter? Well, they pioneered a very unique style of arcade game that was only used twice. Some of my older audience might know this game, Holographic Time Traveler, which was done by way of a concave mirror and a CRT. Sega even tried to make their own game with this technology known as Holoseum. I've played both at Galloping Ghost, and they aren't particularly fun, but it is cool to see. The second point I want to bring up is that this game alone, Street Hockey 95, is perhaps one of the most advanced Super Nintendo games out there. I'll be the first to tell you, this game is fucking horrible. It's dreadful. It's Street Hockey, but extremely overcomplicated. But the animation in the game involved over 2,000 frames, which is badass. It had digitized sprites of real people. It was eccentric for the 90s, and it was culturally relevant. Kids everywhere played Street Hockey, so for a design choice in-game, props. It's a shame it isn't fun. However, I don't know what the fuck is going on with the box. We see one of the characters pointing at us and being silly. His name is Abe, by the way, but his street name is Flappin' Dread. That's also him doing a fucking kung fu kick with his shirt open. The other chick is the power child, Jill. You can do all of these moves in game, by the way. You just need to get past the abhorrent control scheme and hope that you see your character on screen because the game is way too fast-paced. You ever play Lemmings? This is Lemmings, but with people. And if we're to go off the DOS artwork for it, we already know that we're playing as Kevin Codner. The game's name is Sink or Swim, and that there are dim passengers. In a previous episode, I mentioned that Lemmings is a puzzle game where you tell absolute fucking idiots how to survive in a given environment. If you take that knowledge cookie, you'll know exactly how Sink or Swim is, except the only person we control is you. The people we save just randomly walk around, not to mention that the game kinda looks like dog shit. And there's 99 levels of buffoonery to get through. It's quite a labor of love, and to me it's one of those games that you only played because it was the only game you owned. If I had this as a kid of the 90s, the second that I got any other game, that would be it. I'd be done with Sink or Swim. The box itself features our mongoloid main character Kevin, who has no eyelids, oven mitts for hands. In fact, to me, he's a humanoid Lego. It's just a weird aesthetic. And it's awfully bold to name your game SOS because there was already an SOS on the Super Nintendo and it was badass. One of the best cinematic experiences on the Super Nintendo, and the box art for that game was fucking awesome. This is just bad. Well, we have an offender from Capcom this time around. The game is Magic Sword, which is a beat-em-up. To me, it's a lot like Capcom's take on Golden Axe, if that makes sense. And it started in the arcades in 1990 and found its way on the Super Nintendo in 1992, which is very early for the Super Nintendo. After all, it released in 1991 for US audiences. The game is fun, I can't complain. It reminds me a lot of another Capcom game called Black Tiger, but Magic Sword is way better. The only real complaint I have about it is that the SNES port lacks co-op, which is what makes the arcade version so much fun, at least to me. It also isn't as efficient in the programming department. It does have tons of slowdowns, something that happened with Super Ghouls and Ghosts as well. That being said, as fun as it is to me, the box is a sight to behold. It's not the worst, I've seen worse, it just boggles me. It's themed in the medieval era. That's why we have a roided out He-Man clone on the front of the box. We have a lady using a scoped crossbow. Yeah, scoped. Look at that thing. And we have some weird demonic goon ass with his magic black ball shooting lightning. It's just cheesy as cheesy can be. Where's Fabio when we need him? What was he doing in 92? Was that before or after the goose attack? Oh shit, I forgot about Rhea Systems. Man, Rhea Systems is a company that created a few games. All of them are educational to the core, to the point where it's shoved in your face. The plot of this game is... it's gold. You see, we play as Captain Novolin, you know, from the brand of insulin, and it's our job to head to Pineville to save the diabetic mayor, Mayor Gooden, from aliens and their leader, Blubberman. Now, usually we wouldn't bat an eye at this, right? Well, we have to, because Mayor Gooden only has 48 hours worth of insulin before he goes into a diabetic coma. You think that's stupid? Packy and Marlin features 2 diabetic elephants. What about Rex Ronan, experimental surgeon? He goes into people's bodies to take out tobacco. And finally, Bronchi the Bronchiosaurus, he's got asthma. This game is beyond stupid. One thing I didn't pay attention to until now was the subtext on the front of the boxes. For example, Wolfchild is a fast-paced action extravaganza, sheer unadulterated mayhem. Or what about Gemfire? Fantasy and creatures of lore. Some companies really had some eye-catching slogans or descriptors on the front, so pray tell, what did Captain Novolin say on the front? An action-adventure game about diabetes. Oh, the artwork sucks, but hey, that little narrative, absolute zinger. Once upon a time, there was a company named Cinematronics. They developed arcade games in the late 70s and early 80s, ones that looked pretty damn good. Instead of using raster graphics like a vast majority of other companies did at the time, they preferred vector graphics. But what's the difference? Well, raster graphics involve pixels, small squares that when combined with other small squares, create an image. Whereas vector graphics are just lines based on mathematical equations that define shapes, curves, and points. In simpler terms, Space Invaders was raster graphics. Asteroids was vector. Donkey Kong was raster. Battlezone was vector. You get it? Atari and Cinematronics were the pioneers of using vector-styled artwork in arcade games, and Skyhawk is the one that comes to mind. But the most popular game they ever published was Dragon's Lair. Remember that one? Well, around 1987, they went bankrupt. Whoops. Trade West bought their assets and rebranded them to Leland Corporation, where they proceeded to make hit-or-miss games. Fun in Games is one of those hit-or-miss games. It's just a compilation of games, 3 if I recall, none of which are fun, and if you saw this box on the shelf, there's nothing that screams this is fun. It's just the title and some random shit that happens in the game. Hey kid, you like paint, games, music? What about style?
Boy, do I!
Psst, I don't. This isn't fun. I love Wolfenstein 3D. It was a game that I played every now and again when my dad wasn't looking, and a few months ago I had the luxury of actually playing all the way through it. It was a great game, and to be honest, I didn't even know that it had a port to the Super Nintendo. I guess I shouldn't be surprised because it was a landmark FPS. John Carmack, he's a fire starter, a prodigy of the game engine design world. He wasn't afraid to take his knowledge to create badass engines. The ray casting technique that Wolfenstein 3D used was tremendous, and it got even more impressive with the release of Doom. But what is Wolfenstein? Well, it's a game where we say all invaders must die and we play as BJ Blazkowicz, a guy who is always outnumbered but never outgunned. It's a gritty in-your-face game where we take out the bad mustache man, we find out what evil lurks in Castle Wolfenstein, and cowabunga it is. But for the life of me, no matter how amazing this game is, it is one of the worst box arts that I have ever seen, because it 100% looks like Keith Flint of The Prodigy on the front cover. In fact, feel free to see how many Prodigy references I just unloaded on you in the last paragraph. It's stupid looking. We know what Blazkowicz looks like. I mean, his face is on the bottom of the fucking screen. Hell, the first screen shows us what this guy looks like. They figured it out on the PC, but for whatever reason, we have this guy. Got ourselves a zinger here, TKO Super Championship Boxing, also known in Japan as Kinto-O World Champion. This is a softball game. I don't know many games from them, but I do know that they released Extra Innings, which is a baseball game I played recently, and I didn't like it. And guess what? I don't like TKO either. It's basically a rock'em sock'em simulator, but I give mad props to Sting as a company for at least making us able to walk around the ring. There's a championship mode, but I found most of my punches were just whiffing by the opponent. In the Japanese version, we have a story mode, but I guess the translators didn't feel like doing that for the American version. To me, this game has the worst box art I have ever seen for the Super Nintendo, so here it is. Let's unpack it. TKO. Okay. Super Championship Boxing. Okay, what the fuck's going on here? I'll offer you 2 resolutions. Number 1, the referee licked something that may or may not have been coated with lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD for us normies that don't go around licking strange things, or I present an alternative. Hear me out. What if, after the failure of Predator 2 in the theaters, the Predators didn't have any work, so they turned to in-ring officiating? Whatever you choose from these 2, they'll both make sense to me. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think about it? What Super Nintendo box arts are just gross to you? Feel free to let us know down in the comments below. This is a great opportunity to share a laugh and remember these horrible mistakes in video game marketing. By the way, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a group of individuals who love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live, and if that's something you align with, feel free to join us. Finally, the single most important thing you could do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly affects the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.